Hello, everyone, and welcome to Arch Talk Presents, a program brought to you by EPCC's Architecture Society. Today, we will be interviewing Dr. Renata Hedjuk, Associate Professor at Arizona State University. We hope you enjoy the program. Hello, everyone. Today, I have with me Renata Hejduk. This is Arch Talk Presents, and today I will be interviewing with her today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Renata. And so let's go ahead and get started.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to begin with a rather obvious question that I'm sure many of us are curious about. Can you please tell us what it was like to have John Hejduk for a father, and how did that influence your path in architecture?
Sure, I'd be pleased to answer that. So I get asked this question all the time. And I will say, for me, he was the best dad on earth. And him being an architect was just secondary all the time. I can say, because he was an academic, he spent a whole lot of time with me and my brother. And so it was amazing having him as a father, because he was an amazing father and very present, super, what we would say today, co-parent. Obviously, things were much different in the 1970s, and my mother, who was probably the smarter of the two, she didn't work after I was born. She worked a little bit. She taught art and helped him in his office, but so she was the primary caregiver, but he sure was pretty much home every evening by 5:30, and weekends we would take bike rides in the parks together and go to museums. And so we really, we had a very special relationship. And after I moved away, I spoke to him every day. So, so it was great having him as a father.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And something else that I really wanted to discuss with you is, as you probably know, most of art students at EPCC are preparing towards a master's degree in architecture to attain their license. However, you have a PhD in architectural history and theory. Can you please tell us a little bit about your academic background, and specifically, can you tell us about your transition from master's degree in art history to your PhD in architectural history and theory?
Sure. So I'm not trained as an architect at all. I never went to architecture school. I went to Columbia, Barnard College undergrad, and I worked in art history and fine art as an undergrad. And I also took a lot of courses in history of religion, believe it or not. And I'm actually an atheist, which is strange. I was fascinated with early Christianity and Gnosticism and mystery cults and all of this. So I had an amazing mentor at Columbia, Holland Hendricks, and I just couldn't take enough courses with him. So every course he offered, I took. So in some ways, I kind of got a minor in religion as well, which probably explains why I went on to write a book with Jim Williamson later on the religious imagination in contemporary and modern architecture. So I did that undergrad. I took a semester at Rhode Island School of Design while I was an undergrad, and took landscape architecture courses and printmaking, which I was really into. And so I did that, and then I took another semester at Tufts and Museum School in my senior year of college, and also at the Museum School at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. I was able just to concentrate on printmaking, which is what I did for a semester there. And then I graduated. I had an internship at the Institute of Contemporary Art under Elizabeth Sussman and David Josselit, which was mind-blowing, and in Boston. And then I applied to graduate school for a master's degree in art history at Tufts, and started there. Worked with another mentor, Pam Lara, who was a great modernist photographer. And I was at the same time the curatorial assistant Department of Photographs at the Harvards Fogg Art Museum. So to my my studies, I was always working as a curator, going to school. So I continued to work at the Fogg Art Museum for about 4 or 5 years. Then I went down to New Haven, and I was finishing up my master's thesis writing, and I got a job as the assistant curator of European and Contemporary art at the Yale University Art Gallery. Everybody knows the Lucon building there. And I worked there for quite a number of years as an assistant curator and continued to think about contemporary 1960s art, which I was fascinated. But all my friends were architects. They were all getting their Masters of Architecture in the Yale Architecture Department, Yale School of Architecture. And so I was just hanging around with architects all the time. And yeah, pretty amazing group of people, Charlie Laser, Louise Hartman. It was just a kind of incredible time right then. And I decided that I wanted to continue and get my PhD. I knew that if I wanted to continue on as a curator, I had to have a PhD. At that point in time, you had to have a PhD in art history. But I decided to go back and get my PhD in architectural history with a concentration on post-war art and architecture and urbanism. And I went to Harvard and studied under Michael Hayes. And then also Tony Bittler was my other mentor through this project.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. And so to elaborate a little bit further on that, what kind of career opportunities would you say become available with attaining a PhD in, architecture as opposed to the master's degree and, the license?
Well, my PhD is in architectural history. It's not a DDes, which would be a design degree, which you also can get in the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. My degree is from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, although I taught in the GSD while I was getting my degree. So probably the only reason anyone would go and get a PhD in art and architectural history would be because they want to be a scholar or researcher at that level and teach at the university level. Because the terminal degree to teach architectural history and art history is the PhD. So that's the only reason, and I always tell people, don't bother, going down this road just because you might think it's cool or whatever. It's a 7-year journey and a whole lot of work and expensive, and and there's so few jobs out there. So I think young architects should absolutely gain licensure. They should, if they love school, they should get a BArch. Nowadays, everybody really wants an MArch. So, maybe go on for the MArch if you already have the BArch, but there's no point in getting a PhD unless you want to fight for the few jobs that are out there. But the DDes is an interesting degree because it's a 2-year, really 2 years in residency, like a design doctorate, and that's for people who want to do architectural design research, which is really interesting. So I often steer young architects to say, look at the DDes, because that's perhaps a better degree for somebody who wants to continue on as a designer, but wants to have that kind of really deep scholarly research in a design project.
Okay. So to elaborate a little bit further on that, so then would you say the academia to attain your PhD is more research oriented, or how would you say it's different than undergraduate studies?
Yeah, it's for research. People who look at my books. This is only half of them. The other half's down the rest of the hallway. It's really for people who just want to sit in the library all the time and just read all the time. That's what I would say. If you love archives, if you're a good detective and you look like a good detective story, it's for people who just like to go deep and are detail oriented, and who love to write, because the expectation is, of course, hundreds of pages of a dissertation.
Okay, wow. And so my next question is a little bit about what is in those bookshelves? What and who inspires you?
Wow, that's a good question. I am a voracious reader, and I'll read anything, actually. So you'll see things from French philosophy to Bernard Schumy to the history of the Situationists to work on the Anthropocene and biomimicry and nature. I'm a huge science nerd. I probably would get a PhD in science if I had to go back right now. So I'll read anything and everything. I read a lot of fiction, tons of art and architecture, history books, lots of great journals from the 1960s and 70s in art and architecture. What else is on here? Space. I'm super interested in space.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah. So whatever I am fascinated with, and I feel like I want to teach, I just go deep. Yeah.
So, having said that, what would you say is kind of your design philosophy, and how do you combine that, as a professor of architecture?
Well, I don't teach design, so I'm purely, I just teach the history theory sequence here at AFU. So I don't teach in the design studio. I go and sit on reviews quite a lot, which I really love and enjoy, and I sit on reviews all over the country. So I don't, I'm not a designer. I'm purely a researcher. I spend a lot of time thinking about the city and the future of the city and the past of the city. I'm really interested in radical movements in art and architecture post-war, and I really do a lot of intellectual history. So I'm very interested in how really all of the forces around a particular, let's say, art group or architecture group, or artist or architect or urbanist, really how all the forces kind of conspire to help produce the work that is produced by those artists and architects and urbanists.
Okay, wonderful. And what would you say? Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit about your teaching philosophy?
Sure. I love being in the classroom. I really believe that we learn more from the students than they'll ever learn from us. So I try to share what I know and what I'm fascinated with in the classroom, and I try to tell a kind of story. My classes are often, the students often say, your class was interesting because I feel like you were a storyteller when you were lecturing. And I really believe in what my friend Jim Williamson says, teaching is an exchange of gifts. So when I'm teaching, I really try to engage the students in conversation and debate and critical thinking. I really believe in critical thinking and argument. And so all of those things are basically part and parcel of the work that I do in creating learning community. And that's really what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in this kind of co-creation of knowledge with my students. And I love when sparks happen and when the light bulb goes off. Absolutely. And I love hearing what they're thinking about, because then I learn new things that I should be looking at. So that's basically, it's a little different on Zoom now, but I would say in some ways more intimate. And I think, like, I just taught a seminar this past semester, which was probably one of the best seminars I've ever taught, even though we weren't in a classroom together. I think somehow being on Zoom together, I don't know, just being in each other's houses and, having a cat jump up on the keyboard at one of, like that kind of stuff made it a lot sweeter, I think. In some ways, and we got to know each other in a way we probably wouldn't get to know each other just sitting around the table.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That's an excellent point. And okay, so I just have a few more questions for you. Sure. Okay, so especially now things are presenting some different challenging circumstances, and we're all
opportunities,
and we're all adjusting and learning accordingly. So So can you share with us a little bit about, what was your lowest point academically and how did you overcome that?
Lowest point. Gosh, I am such an eternal optimist. I don't ever think about the lowest point, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I wouldn't even know how to answer that. I've always just loved being in a classroom as a student. I loved doing research and doing making when I was doing a lot of art. And so I don't think I've ever associated anything not fantastic with,
That's great. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Being in this, I just find what I do now such a privilege. It's been a privilege to teach. It's an amazing job, which Absolutely. I would wish on anyone. I think we are all so lucky to be in academic environments and be with students, and really fortunate. And I think I felt the same way. Even maybe I wasn't quite as conscious of it when I was a student, but boy, I sure loved being in school to spend whatever 36 years that I did, or however long it was. I started school in kindergarten, and I got my PhD when I was about 36. Yeah, I think I spent so many years in academia. I always felt most comfortable there. I kind of didn't think I would ever, after being a curator for many years, I missed academia. Oh. So I think the lowest point I ever had was really when I was a curator. And just working with people who are often unkind and not generative, and really about power, and you find that often in the art world and the museum world, Okay. So I would say my lowest point was probably in when I was a curator, and it actually spurred me to go on and get my PhD. And my mother and father both said, Renata, you got to get out of this situation. This person I was working with was just not a nice person. And they said, you got to get your PhD, because then you're going to have opportunities. You can continue on as a curator, you can be a full curator or an associate curator, which you really couldn't do without a PhD when I was doing it, which was a long time ago. So I would say that that was my lowest point.
And you use it as a catalyst. That's wonderful.
And it really spurred me to go on and continue my education. And it's been all good since.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. And now on the other end of the spectrum, what would you consider to be your greatest success?
Well, my greatest success in life is my family, for sure. That is, for all of you listening, don't forget to gather around the people who you care about when you're going through school, and forge those friendships with people. I think my friends and my family are my greatest joy. And I would say, I'm proud of the work that I do that's published, and the work that I do as a professor. I think Jim and My Book was the first book to really look at not religious structures, but the kind of way that architects think about the spiritual and the ephemeral and religion and faith and the sacred. And that was the first book to really look at that in modern contemporary architecture. So very proud about that, because I feel like we added new knowledge to the world. And I have some great projects that I'm working on right now. And one of them will be a book that looks at my father's pieces, The House of the Suicide and House of the Mother of the Suicide, in the Czech Republic and the arc of history from the late 1960s to the present. And I'm writing that with Jim Williamson and Kim Skatvich and Stephen Hillier, who are all part and parcel of my father's kind of orbit. And so we're working on that. We were in the Czech Republic last year, and sadly, it's kind of everything's a little bit on hold right now just because of COVID. But and once things, sort of calm down a bit, we'll get back to that work. And I've got a book coming out on Reggio Emilia education and architecture. So I'm really always just inspired by what I'm thinking about right now, and excited, and I just never can find quite enough time to write, because work and family balance is tough, but we do what we can, and things sometimes take a little bit longer than you hope, but I'm cool with that. So it's okay.
Okay, wow, that's wonderful. And so, as you know, at EPCC, we cater to first and second year students.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in closing, I wanted to ask you if you could give our students one piece of advice, what would it be?
Wow. Wow. I know I try to give my students a lot of advice all the time. I'm not sure they listen to any of it. I think, listen, the thing that I think everybody should do is always be present.
Mhm.
And I think the students that I see who are the most successful are the students who kind of are really honest with themselves about who they are and how they interact in the world. And when you do that kind of deep dive and think about like whether you're not showing up for things or not responding or not being generous in your conversations with others, I think when you do that work and then you begin to think about how do I want to be part of a learning community and how can I participate in it, I think that's probably the best advice I can give is, sort of think about your motivation and think about where you want to be. And I know it's hard when you're a first or second year student to think about where you even want to be next semester.
Right.
But, if you could forward model for yourself or write a letter to your future self, maybe, or write a letter from the future to yourself right now, I would say, think about what you aspire to for yourself and what you need to do to achieve it. I always say just showing up is half the battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being on time, I'm
Right.
kind of old-fashioned that way, but I think just being present, I say to my students now in the Zoom world, turn on your camera, like be there, be present in what we're doing so that people can see your face and see your curiosity or see your disdain or whatever it is.
Right.
Like just being there and being like super present for your classmates and giving them, encouragement in the work that they do and sharing the knowledge that you have that maybe they need. I would say like architecture is a collaborative, right? Like the myth of the singular architect or the hero architect is just that myth. Frank Lloyd Wright could have done nothing without all the minions of people helping him.
That's right.
Unpaid. So I would say understand that architecture is a collaborative discipline.
Mhm.
And you're going to collaborate for your entire career with engineers and systems people and landscape architects and clients, right? And communities. And so learning collaborative skills and being present for one another and being honest and really transparent in your dealings with your fellow students, but also your faculty, just being super honest. And if you can't make deadlines, just let them know. I think, that seems to be, people feel fear, I think, a lot about like what they're able to do or not able to do. And I always say to my students, look, life happens and life happens to all of us and great things happen to us and often things that kind of stop us in our tracks happen. And the best thing that you can do is just ask for help when you need it. Don't be shy and you'll and when you have great things happen, share them with everyone. And I think that's you'll do really well in your life. Just being collaborative and generative and listening and sharing and being present. I think is my it's always the thing I that bums me out the most is when students even show up for class and they're just not there. And so I think just kind of being in the space with people around you and being part of a learning community it's such a gift. Education is such a gift of time that you get. Why waste it, staring at your phone or whatever you might be doing, in class? be there. Don't waste. You'll look back someday and be like, gosh, I wish I was like listened that day to my fellow classmates when they were speaking, and I wish I was part of that conversation or that dialogue. And we can't get that back. So that would be my only bit of advice, I guess.
You're absolutely right. That's excellent advice, especially now with all these kind of Zoom meetings and interactions. You make some very good points.
Well, in some ways, you can be even more. You have to be more present in Zoom, in a sense, you know.
Exactly.
and if you really want to get anything out of the conversations, so I would say take this time. You can be in your own house, or you can be in your own backyard and get outside and do your Zooms outside or whatever, or listen in. But
anywhere.
It gives you a little bit of freedom, but don't take that freedom for granted. Be super present. Now that you've got that kind of choice of where you can be when you're participating.
Absolutely. Again, that's excellent advice, and thank you so much for sharing so much stuff with us. This is really good advice, and thank you for sharing with us about your background, and I'm sure the students will benefit greatly from hearing everything that you had to share with us today. Thank you so much.
I know my friend David Gersten, I think, came and did a lecture with your students recently.
Oh, yes.
So I love that, all these people who were in my father's constellation are somehow making their way to El Paso, which is phenomenal.
That is. It's wonderful. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. That's great. And thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And enjoy the rest of your Thank you so much. Okay.
Hopefully next time we'll meet, it'll be in person.
Yes, ma'am. That sounds great. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
This concludes our program. Thank you for listening to Art Talk Presents, brought to you by EPCC's Architecture Society, an interview with Dr. Renata Hedjuk. This is your host, Crystal Lindstrom. Until next time.